Happy Friday. Good afternoon. I am Kritika Shah, an architect at Shaladia Associates. And today we are going to talk about comparing green building standard rating system. This presentation is hosted on AIA Potomac Valley, and it's part of the code committee. A few housekeeping items before we start. This presentation is 1HSW LU approved by AIA, and it's being recorded. So please keep your microphones muted through the presentation. And if you have any questions, please use the chat box to add your questions in. And at the end of the presentation, I will pick some questions and will ask our speaker. The learning objectives for this presentation is to learn the similarities and differences of the different green building standards and wellness systems, especially how it affects the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in the presentation that you'll see in the next 1 hour. This presentation was put together by Jennifer Wolf, who is our speaker, and she is the Director of Sustainable Programs at Sustainable Building Partners, which is in Fairfax, Virginia. Jennifer has a background of civil engineering and started in the construction industry, and then she pivoted to sustainability towards sustainability and has been working at SBP for 10 years. And some of the big projects that she's worked on that we all may be aware of in this area is the yards in DC and the upcoming net geo building also in DC. So on to you, Jen. Take it over.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great. So I'll just kind of start right into it for today. Kind of what Kritika mentioned, our learning objectives, just to kind of give the lay of the land of all the various different rating systems that are available to use on your various projects. So, and go over on kind of a high level, broad strokes, what they are, what the requirements are, any major considerations, and then moving into, how do I select what's the best, the best one? What's the best fit for my project? And kind of the thought process that I typically go through whenever I'm trying to navigate and apply different rating systems to projects that come across my desk on a day-to-day basis. So first off, just going into the approach and, what are all the things that we should be considering or could be considering whenever we're looking at applying sustainability to a project? I like this Venn diagram here. It's kind of, the intersection of all of these ideas and requirements. Where first, you have your code and compliance section. What is the Department of Buildings telling me? What are the different permitting departments telling me that needs to be applied to my project? Does green code or green policy, energy code apply to my project? Then we have our frameworks and how do we recognize projects in the market? So those are our typically our rating systems. There are LEED, Fitwel, NGBS, EGC, ILFI, Passive House. There's all these, this bucket of rating systems and frameworks that we can use and leverage, and then kind of identify strategies to drive sustainability into our projects. And then there's this other bucket of items, which are our goals and commitments. I'm sure in various projects that you guys are all tackling, you're starting to hear that there's different, developers have identified and publicly communicated different commitments they may have around carbon reductions or water reduction. They might be a green lease leader. They may have a strong interest in different materials and making sure we're applying, healthy and environmentally friendly materials on our projects. So really understanding what goals and commitments they have made or things that they're trying to tackle as a larger development and company. And then as we kind of look at this, it's kind of understanding where all those things dovetail together. So that's kind of the initial approach. We'll first kind of go into the first section here of frameworks and all the different rating systems available. Some of the ones that we'll cover today include LEED and all the various different LEED standards there are. NGBS, National Green Building Standard, Enterprise Green Communities, Fitwell, Passive House, and some of ILFI's various certification pathways. Once again, though, whenever you're taking that, I always look at the starting point. Understanding where we're located plays a major role in selecting and applying the best rating system to your project. Some key considerations, especially for the DMV area. Maryland is code-based, so green codes exist in Maryland and kind of are the starting point for being able to tackle and apply a green building rating system on your project. Similarly in DC, DC has their own green code and their Green Building Act. Virginia and North Carolina are very different. They are all policy-based. Green is not codified in Virginia or North Carolina. So understanding that is really important as well, because some of those policy things in Virginia are incentive-based and often negotiated. Whereas in DC and Maryland, that's your starting point to be able to even do a project in those areas. So I have this, it's different but the same because it really is, especially when you look at green codes and green policies. For green building codes, they're often dictated and kind of use the International Green Construction Code as its starting point. So what each jurisdiction has done is they've typically adopted IGCC as a starting point and then amend it through their code processes. So IGCC includes a bunch of mandatory items. It's often very prescriptive. They say you have to have that flow rate, you have to have, that specific product. And then they add layers of elective points. And that's typically dictated by the size of your project. How many other electives do I want you to pursue and achieve for the project? However, and in my experiences for the various projects I've worked on, is there's usually alternative compliance pathways that are baked into the code. So they'll say, I want you to do, IGCC is the base, but I will allow you to take an alternative compliance pathway and pursue LEED or pursue NGBS to meet code requirements. When you pivot over to Virginia, North Carolina, some of those other states and commonwealths that have policy-based green requirements, it's incentive-based. So Arlington County is a great example if you're familiar with how that jurisdiction operates. They provide bonus density for their project if you follow the green building incentive policy. Those policies typically use a green building rating system as its basis. So they'll often say our policy is based around you achieving LEED Gold, or our policy is based around you achieving something else. I will say, and I thought it was important to bring up today, what we're seeing as well is a lot of these policies are not necessarily moving away from green building rating systems, but they are starting to introduce many more performance metrics. So I want you to achieve a certain EUI. I want you to achieve a certain carbon reduction. I want you to do whole building air leakage testing. So some of those things are now being introduced into the policies. And then lastly is energy. Energy code applies across all of these jurisdictions and states and commonwealths. It's important to understand what those energy codes say and what pathways they provide. One is a prescriptive base. You just check all those boxes, or you can do a performance pathway and you can do an energy model. However, it's also good to understand what amendments have been made to those energy codes and then how it's going to be enforced and what different entities from those jurisdictions may be involved. DC, if you've worked on a DC project recently, they have their own very tailored energy code. So ASHRAE, for example, is not your basis for designing a building in DC. They are layering all different things into it and really moving towards a net zero energy code in the very near future. So once you navigate that soup maybe it's a soup, maybe it's something else, spaghetti. Then you can kind of dig further into what pathway do I want to take and what frameworks are available. So I'll kind of go into all of the details at a high level in broad stroke around these different rating systems. First is LEED. LEED is currently under version 4. We'll introduce some version 5 topics here in a second. But LEED is structured under different rating systems. So you have your building design and construction, your interior design and construction, your operations and maintenance, neighborhood development, and homes rating systems. And under each one of those, they have different adaptations based on your project type. So it's very comprehensive. Most projects can take a LEED pathway. You can achieve different certification levels. Certified is your first threshold. You have to achieve at least 40 points, and then it works your way up from there to silver, gold, and platinum. And then LEED is structured under these credit categories. So integrated process, location and transportation, sustainable sites, water efficiency, energy efficiency, materials and resources, environmental quality, and innovation. Generally, these credit categories exist under all of our rating systems into some way. You know, they tend to address topics within each one of these categories. I'll hone in a little bit more specifically for residential projects here at the very top of this slide. You have 3 options under LEED for achieving LEED certification. On the left hand, I guess the left in the middle, is ones that apply to your multifamily construction. So currently under LEED version 4, you can take a multifamily project, 4 stories or higher, and achieve either new construction or multifamily mid-rise certification. The one kind of caveat here is that under multifamily mid-rise, you cannot have any shared MEP systems between the units. So that's one thing to consider whenever you're trying to look at different rating systems. And then the last one here on the right is LEED homes and low rise. That's for your 1 to 3 story construction. You do have to have at least 80% of that space dedicated to residential space. And then lastly here, for residential specifically, is that there's a different delivery method under these rating systems in the LEED process. So on the left, LEED BD&C new construction for a residential project is highly documentation based. So if you're familiar with LEED Online, in the LEED Online process, you have a design and construction application, and what you're doing is collecting information using the design documents, using information that the contractor provides you and documenting on LEED Online. For your multifamily mid-rise and homes construction projects, you are a testing and verification-based rating system and certification pathway. What that means is you involve a green rater. You have someone on your project team who will go out on site during construction and inspect and test and verify that all the things we included in the design documents are actually being put into the project. And then also doing some of those testing requirements outside of commissioning, you're doing unit blower door testing and duct leakage testing for those residential projects. So kind of 2 different pathways. I would say both have their pros and cons. We take our residential projects and put them through both pathways very often. A lot of people, sometimes the project team really prefers that documentation-based efforts in using LEED Online. Others very much appreciate having a rater and some kind of that person right on site who you can talk to and get some feedback very immediately on how you're doing towards the certification process. For this slide, this is still LEED, generally broad stroke across all those rating systems. LEED has mandatory requirements, which are on the right here. Those are prerequisites that have to be achieved across all of those projects. I won't focus entirely here except energy use reduction. Currently, that's now at 10% based on a new energy update that occurred in March 2024. So something to definitely keep in mind. If you did a LEED project in 2023 and are now have a LEED project today, you will be held to different energy requirements based on a new energy update. And I have a slide that kind of shows what that change looks like. Some other key requirements are ventilation. So ventilation, you have to have whole building ventilation, you have to have kitchen exhaust ducted directly to outside. So those are some key considerations in the prerequisites. You also have some base services that come when pursuing a LEED project. So you will be doing whole building energy modeling. You will be doing MEP commissioning. So those are things just to know off the bat that will be layered onto your project if you're pursuing LEED. But within LEED's framework, you have a lot of opportunity to really nudge it forward and kind of celebrate other aspects of the project and strategies you may be implementing. There is a lot of Energy Star elements that are pulled into these LEED certifications pathways. You have an opportunity to really focus in on the enclosure and then achieve points for doing building enclosure commissioning and testing the enclosure. You also have ways to celebrate any carbon reductions that you might be implementing. So embodied carbon and operational carbon. And lastly, there is a whole category kind of focused on occupant experience and comfort. So you can really narrow in and lean into some of those credit requirements in order to make sure you're driving some occupant experience aspects into your design. Real quick on the LEED version 4 energy updates. So on the left-hand side is how LEED version 4 used to award points for different energy performance. And what you can kind of see is what was prerequisite before, which was 5%, is now 10% on the right-hand side. And then what they did is they introduced a new structure for energy. So instead of just being energy cost, now they're focusing on energy cost and greenhouse gas emission reduction. And this was really to prep the industry for what's coming with LEED version 5. So LEED version 5. This is in the works right now. There is currently a public comment period that is available. So if you're interested, you can log in and look at the credit library. It's available if you have any interest in kind of looking at the credits and providing comments. The plan is to have this rating system balloted and ready for use in early 2025. So we should have a very new rating system to work from next year. The structure of LEED version 5 will be different. So all of the points that are under LEED version 5 are supposed to address climate action, quality of life, and ecology. So 50% of the points and the credits that are in the new version are really focused in on climate action, carbon reduction, etc. The new version also really emphasizes integrated process and really going through assessments and grounding your strategies in some assessments that you do really early on in the project. However, they are introducing also some prescriptive pathways and options under the rating system. So there is an opportunity to forego an energy model right now in the current version of the rating system in the draft for just achieving your energy compliance prescriptively. And then there's lots of pathways and options under the new version in order to earn points. So it's brand new. We just took a deep dive into it and kind of tried to parse out all of the new things that are being introduced in version 5 and it'll really kind of nudge the industry forward. Next is NGBS. NGBS is the National Green Building Standard. It is the only ANSI standard available. NGBS is residential focused. So it applies to multifamily and single family construction. So if you have an office building, you won't be doing NGBS. But similar to LEED multifamily mid-rise, it is a testing and verification-based rating system. Like a Green Rater, there is a NGBS verifier for your project. So that person is responsible for verifying that the rating system requirements have been upheld and are installed in the project. And once they do that verification, then you will achieve your certification. Similar to LEED, it has points and it has credit categories. The credit categories are very similar here. They have 4 certification thresholds: bronze, silver, gold, emerald. And then you will, earn points under each category to achieve your level. So very similar to LEED. I think the takeaway here is that you have to earn a minimum number of points in each credit category in order to achieve your certification level. So if you want to be silver, you have to achieve at least 64 points under Chapter 5. You can't make it up anywhere else. I would say, based on our experience, most projects in the DMV area typically fall nicely into a bronze, silver sort of certification threshold. That's a broad kind of general experience from working in projects in, Charlottesville and Charlotte, all the way up to Pennsylvania and Montgomery County and Frederick and DC. That's generally what I see is our design practices and our standards for our areas fit really nicely for a bronze or silver certification level. From a prerequisite standpoint, a lot of this is very prescriptive based. It does fall heavily on the architect to kind of make sure that the project is at least meets these minimum thresholds. So there's a lot of emphasis on water protection, making sure all your flashings are in the correct locations, you have the appropriate barriers in place, you're sloping, all of your design features correctly. So there's a lot of kind of emphasis on water protection from the HVAC side of things. It's making sure you're sizing things correctly for that project and what its needs are. And then lastly, there is an operations and maintenance element to this. So it's compiling some information to make sure whoever is responsible for operating this building can do so and uphold all of the green elements that have been put in place. NGBS is very flexible. So you saw all of those points, and they've structured it that way that you can kind of pick and choose and become very flexible in the way you achieve your certification level. So with that, with your base services, really your NGBS verifier is the main person you need in order to do and pursue an NGBS certification. However, because of its flexibility, they do offer many opportunities to kind of take it further. So we can lean on Energy Star. We can, look at enclosure. We can look at carbon reduction elements and really kind of incorporate those into the project and drive higher levels of certification in NGBS. Next is Enterprise Green Communities. Enterprise Green Communities is for affordable housing. So if you don't have any affordable housing within your residential building, you cannot apply Enterprise Green Communities to that project. That's probably the key takeaway. There are 2 phases. So from a process point of view, there is a pre-build application and there is a post-build application. And EGC does leverage the Energy Star certification and rating system. So there are pathways depending if you're a new construction or if you are a rehabilitation project. There's different pathways in there, but you will be leaning on and leveraging a lot out of the Energy Star rating system. So you do kind of have that on-site testing and verification element here. Similar to LEED and NGBS, we have credit categories that are kind of mirror images here. But another key element here is it's a very comprehensive, community-focused, occupant experience-based rating system. And what I mean by that is there is this mandatory project priority survey that must occur early on in the project. So SBP usually has kind of a version of this that we use, but what we focus on is what is the project's mission? And then we ask those questions in a meeting and really have the project team reflect and document that. Who does it serve? What are my vulnerable populations? What challenges and opportunities exist? What are my climate hazards? How do I mitigate them? So it does have that very integrated process approach to the project and making sure all voices are heard and documented and understood as we're designing the building. I'm trying to keep an eye on my time. So first, the next sustainability rating system is the International Living Future Institute and their various certifications. So this is kind of this stair-step certification pathway here, or options. It starts with the zero carbon certification. We also have a zero energy certification, and then it gets into its core green building certification, its living building challenge pedal certification, and its full certification. ILFI and the way it's structured is everything within each certification here is mandatory. There's no options. If you're going to pursue it, you are going to do everything in there that is laid out for you. It is very performance focused. So they are really trying to drive projects toward higher levels of performance and to become really regenerative in their design strategies. Because of its very comprehensive and stringent requirements, it is a rating system, all of them, where you want to make sure your team is fully engaged, you have full buy-in from everyone, and you're really monitoring and running the required calculations as you're designing the project. You can get a ready designation once the project is complete, but certification does not come until you have 12 months of demonstrated performance. So that is another thing to really consider, and why I kind of emphasize that buy-in is that your certification is based on actual performance. This slide just kind of gives you a visual of what's the difference between a core certification and what's the difference between a living building challenge certification. So your core requirements generally mirror what we've already talked about for LEED and NGBS. There's requirements within, energy and carbon, healthy interior environment, responsible water use, etc. The living building challenge builds upon those core requirements and pushes projects further. So they have higher levels of performance that are required, and just asking for more, as it should. The pedal designations that you could do a core certification and then get certain pedal designations, and those pedal requirements are listed in that blue text. So you can get, core with our living building challenge certification with a materials pedal. So that's just kind of one notch down from the full living building challenge certification. I kind of used this time to really introduce the concept of zero. And we hear net zero, we hear zero carbon, we hear those requirements in what jurisdictions are driving to, and what our clients and development teams are asking of us. The one thing I'd like to emphasize here is really knowing the definition of zero as it applies to your project. Not all zeros are equal. So for example, DC has a definition of net zero, and what they have that listed out very, very detailed in their appendix and their energy code on what they define as zero. ILFI has their own definition of zero. LEED has their own definition of zero. And so you can kind of see that here, the difference between the Living Building Challenge and LEED Zero, where whether or not combustion is allowed on the project. So ILFI does not allow combustion at all, whereas LEED will give you an ability to have combustion on the project. So not all zeros are equal, and kind of really, if a project, a client or a developer or anyone is coming at you with the terminology zero, I would often ask them what zero. Is it an IL5 zero? Is it a DC energy code zero? And then kind of digging into those requirements to fully understand how it needs to apply to your project. Next is passive house. So passive house is very focused on energy and enclosure principles. So it's not as comprehensive as all of the other rating systems that we just discussed. It has a narrow focus, but very ambitious requirements. So it focuses on more thermal performance. It has, is it well insulated? You really need to look at your thermal bridging if you're pursuing passive house. It looks at air tightness, making sure everything is sealed correctly and tested. It often, because it's trying to minimize heat gain into a building, looking at your window performance. And then because it's so well sealed, you then need to look at ventilation and making sure you're getting the appropriate air circulation and ventilation into your building. And then lastly is renewable energy. So all of these measures, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are working to bring that building's mechanical conditioning needs down to 0. And if you can't get there, then using renewable energy to offset the rest. So passive house has lots of examples and case studies for single family construction. There's a lot of information, especially in the Northeast, on how passive house has been successfully applied and typically to single family construction. We don't have as many passive house projects in the DMV area, especially commercial construction. But we are starting to see and hear jurisdictions actually leveraging some of the requirements of the passive house and applying it to commercial construction. For the DMV area, there are some considerations. Definitely climate. We are a very humid subtropical climate. So making sure the passive house strategies are adapted to address our climate conditions. We really have to make sure we manage moisture well, which means that we need to introduce a lot of, or make sure we're really looking at all of our details, right? So that comes with complexity. As projects get bigger, they often become more complex. We have many more intersections where different materials are intersecting with each other, which introduces opportunity for more air infiltration. So because passive house is so focused on air tightness, that means we even need to pay more attention to our intersections and our details there to avoid any air infiltration. Also cost. So cost, the level of insulation and kind of some of the other needs mainly from an architectural standpoint to make sure we're addressing all the passive house requirements can introduce cost to your project. So really understanding too what the budget constraints are, knowing how far we can take it, et cetera, on certain projects. And then lastly is comfort, making sure that we can just address all the comfort needs of the project and the occupants if we're still looking to pursue passive house. It's the best fit is new construction. So if we're looking to apply passive house to a rehabilitation, it could be more challenging because you have a lot of existing conditions and you might be chasing those air infiltration issues if we're trying to apply it to existing construction. So new construction is the best fit. And generally too is single family and low rise projects. I think I'm doing pretty good on time, but okay, so I'll pivot here before we go into kind of the thought process and how you can kind of go through a checklist of items to understand which rating system is the best fit. I'll close out here with wellness. So 2 predominant wellness rating systems are Fitwel and Well. Fitwel here is probably pretty well applied in the DMV market. So we see a lot of projects that are looking and seeking Fitwel certification. it is a policy-driven rating system, and you'll kind of see that in the percentages down here. 39% of the points are kind of captured in design, but 58% is facilities and how you plan on operating that building and what kind of policies do you have in place. And then lastly, 3% is HR policy. So for the development, the property management company, what kind of policies they have in place to make sure they're taking care of its employees. There's no audit, there's no preconditions, there's limited impact to MEP. So oftentimes it layers really well on some of the other sustainability certifications you may be pursuing. WELL is a very robust and comprehensive wellness rating system. It is data-driven, it is highly design-oriented. So similarly, if we go down to the bottom row here, 47% of its points are relative to design strategies and design decisions. Only 15% are relative to facilities, and then 38% are impacted by your HR policies. It does have preconditions, and it is verification based. So unlike Fitwell, we do have mandatory requirements here, and then there will be someone that comes out on site and verifies that all of the WELL strategies have been implemented, and then doing the appropriate and required testing in order to achieve WELL certification. Okay, so that's kind of the lay of the land on probably the predominant rating systems we're seeing in the DMV area, in which you all probably come across. Now I'm going to pivot into selection. And so how do we navigate and apply the best rating system to our project? And I'm going to share how I kind of tackle this approach. So what should I do? You have all these things, and then you have, talk to your client and your development team or the rest of the project team and consultants. And we have this house of goals. We have the client's experience with a different rating system. We have compliance considerations, what the green code is telling me I need to do. We have a budget, we have cost constraints. We have different aspirations of the various project team members. We might have some performance goals. We may have a project or a client that needs a certain level of flexibility in kind of applying different strategies to their project. We have marketing. They might be trying to market it a specific way, shape, or form. And then accountability. So can we meet all of the performance requirements or the verification requirements the rating systems may be asking, the code might be asking, or that the project team, the client and developer may need. So I took this, I was trying to think of a good image, and maybe I was hungry whenever I did this slide, but I came up with a sandwich because I really felt that it expressed kind of how all of those goals, that house of goals, could be approached. So I really think of the bread, the two ends of the sandwich, the bread, as being my bookends, right? So you're often bookended by your code and policy requirements, your green code and your energy code. And then you're often heavily influenced by experiences, right? How did this go on the last project I did? What is my client's experience with under these different rating systems? And so you're often bookended again by that middle piece of bread. But then in between, your cheeses and your meats and your lettuce, you have, kind of this big spectrum of accountability and flexibility, goals and commitments that you're trying to work within. So I really kind of work in that way. I kind of understand my bookends. What are my codes and policies telling me? What kind of experiences might be influencing this decision? And then kind of look at, the fun stuff in the middle to understand how far I can take it. And at the end of the day, it's kind of backing yourself out from all of the elements in your sandwich and saying, can I do this within my budget? Will it meet, can I market this, or can the client market this building accordingly? And then what kind of performance do I want to see out of it? So with that, I kind of flip that over into this checklist, a similar kind of exercise, which is, working down the checklist and kind of asking these questions on each and every project. What am I designing and building? What type is it? If it's a residential project, if it's an office project. If it's an office project, we know some of those rating systems are completely off the table, right? And then size and complexity, that often drives some of those decisions too. What am I tied to? So kind of writing down, what codes and policies apply. What are the client's experiences? I often ask that very frequently. Is there a preference? What did you do on your last project? How is it being positioned in the market? What kind of competitiveness or marketing aspects to the project? I will say we've actually seen where Fitwell kind of comes into the conversation pretty frequently whenever we ask about competitiveness and how they plan to position that project in the market. Where are my roadblocks? Are there any prerequisites that really kind of take a rating system off the table? Are there any budget or resources that are needed outside of what we anticipated that could kind of influence the decision? And then how do I optimize it? So oftentimes I'll look at where the overlaps are. What we're seeing too is a lot of need or interest in layering rating systems. So if that is something that comes to the table, I try to find the overlaps. Is Energy Star being pulled from LEED and Energy Star is being pulled from something else? Is there a way to layer it on so that it still becomes a pretty comprehensive a sustainable project, but still really keeps those costs, budgets, time, considerations within a reasonable circle. So that's kind of how I approach it. So basically the pathways: find the repetitions and build on your foundations. So find your repetitions. I kind of lay that as the basis, and then I build on the foundations. How much farther do I need to go with it? How much farther can I go with it to drive sustainability and energy performance into the project? So in summary, we're kind of getting towards the end here. This slide here summarizes the green building rating systems and puts them side by side. I did leave Passive House out of this slide intentionally just because it's not as comprehensive as the other rating systems displayed here. But LEED, LEED generally you can apply to all project types. It is a globally recognized rating system. It's comprehensive. It provides, it can be tailored to your building. Then your NGBS rating system is strictly for multifamily and single family construction. It was kind of made specifically for US based construction. And then it is very flexible. So you have a lot of ways to achieve points. Enterprise Green Communities is for affordable housing projects. It does kind of lean on Energy Star too. It introduces those concepts and requirements through the certification. And then ILFI is a rigorous green building rating system. So it has stringent performance criteria. It is bar setting, and it's really looking to those kind of regenerative net positive aspects of construction and buildings. The other kind of takeaway here from this slide is many of these rating systems are currently undergoing an update. So LEED is moving to version 5, and GBS is moving to 2024, and ILFI just introduced its 4.1 certification pathway. So we are kind of in that cycle of updates right now. And what we're hearing is that a lot of it's moving kind of to address climate impacts and climate change. And so we'll continue to see that being folded into these green building certifications. From a jurisdiction standpoint, this just kind of gives you another visual of how sustainability is being applied in different jurisdictions you may be operating in. DC has several enforcement mechanisms around sustainability and energy performance. They have code, they have the Green Building Act, they have the Greener Government Building Act, which is appearing specifically around affordable housing and DC funded affordable housing projects. They have their PUD process, and then they have BEPS, which is the Building Energy Performance Standard. Pathways, they generally allow you various pathways, and you can apply different green building rating systems to your projects. But they also include requirements for each pathway and an energy code for testing and verification. Arlington County, because it's in the Commonwealth of Virginia, is policy-based. They do have the energy code though, but a lot of it's just policy-based. And right now it's kind of hinges around a LEED Gold certification pathway, and we'll see how that develops here. They are also in a policy update, so it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that next round. And Montgomery County is a code-based green building pathway. They also have a BEPS requirement, which is documented performance during operations. Montgomery County typically leans on NGBS, and then its testing and verification pathways are through commissioning and visual inspection. So I would say it's like a similar to DC, specifically to how it's, codified, and continues to kind of move in that direction. And lastly is, why should I do it? So often we're trying to communicate the benefits of sustainability and energy performance to our clients, to our communities. So one, economic benefits, lower operating costs. So you will see doing a whole building energy model, really looking at those energy performance considerations and narrowing in on those opportunities to reduce it. They'll use less energy, which means less utility costs, increased property value, access to incentives and grants. So that's something we're hearing more and more. The Inflation Reduction Act has incentives. Counties have incentives, tax incentives available to them. There's different ways to get credit for doing these various sustainability certifications. We're also seeing equity partners and lenders require different green building certifications. Your environmental and health impacts, so conservation and reduction of resources, improved indoor air quality, comfort, and long-term health. If the individuals or the people who are using these buildings aren't happy and healthy, the property managers will hear about it. And so driving, sustainability and wellness certifications definitely help ensure that we're driving, we're introducing strategies that, deliver upon occupant experience. And then market differentiation, competitive advantage, communicating, brand reputation, right? So having these layers added to your project, being able to position it competitively in the market, being able to deliver upon any goals and commitments that the clients have, your clients have, or the developer has. And then future-proofing investments. This one, I think, is a big one. We see it and hear it in what the SEC rulings are, and all the different ways that, performance requirements are coming into jurisdictions, BEPS, et cetera. So being able to make sure we're driving enough sustainability and energy performance features, if not day one, being able to add PV ready, EV ready, those elements to a project that then allows them to adapt over time. The budget might not be there now to do it day one, but thinking through those strategies, we've had lots of good conversations with our project teams on what can we do to plan for the future? How can we avoid, penalties or other things that could come down the line that we're not really sure of right now, but we're trying to work toward planning for. And that's it. So that's kind of the end. I can open up for Q&A. Kritika, I think do you have any questions or any other questions that came through?
We have one question from Sue, which is, are there any ILFI buildings in the DMV area other than the Alice Ferguson headquarters?
I haven't looked recently. I know of what's happening. I haven't looked to see if anything's been certified recently, but we are seeing ILFI start to be included in the Department of Government Services, the DGS for DC. They are starting to introduce ILFI requirements into their RFPs. We are seeing other developers interested in the zero carbon certification pathway under ILFI. I think that is going to appear in one of the policies in Virginia, or a pathway for incentives. Um, so I haven't looked recently to know if there's another one that's been certified, but we are seeing and hearing more about it in the DMV area.
And in general, in this area, we see more of LEED and NGBS certifications, but Passive House or ILFI is comparatively new, but Passive House or is not getting as much traction as the other rating systems. Is there a reason behind it? Is it complexity for certification, or are there other reasons?
Yeah, I think one, it is rigorous. I think two, if you're looking for a comprehensive rating system that kind of addresses other aspects of sustainability, Passive House doesn't address all of those. So water, um, sustainable sites, etc. So it is narrow focused. And then two, building complexity. Some of our larger buildings, just outright some of those ventilation and heating and cooling demands. As the project gets bigger and more complex, it gets harder, more costly to to hit all of the Passive House requirements. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but it does. Budget constraints can start to limit your ability to apply Passive House on larger projects. So it is generally, we've seen it's very well suited for new, low rise, single family construction. And that's kind of the market right now that we've seen it best applied to.
Yeah. You spoke about overlapping and layering of different rating systems with respect to Energy Star and Enterprise, but
Mhm.
are there other systems that you would layer? Um, Especially if you think about, if I'm doing Passive House for, say, energy performance, would I layer it with a wellness system like Fitwell or Well? Um, and why would I do that as a developer or a retail owner?
Yeah. So Passive House Plus has its if you layer on DOE's zero energy ready home, it requires, so Passive House Plus requires the DOE zero energy ready homes designation, which then adds Energy Star certification and EPA's Indoor Air Plus certification. Um, so that would be an approach, would be just kind of targeting even the higher level of certification and layering on those aspects. I think where we see Energy Star multifamily new construction layered is for LEED, multifamily mid-rise, and NGBS, um, because those rating systems pull from the Energy Star program pretty. Um, so that's a very nice way to approach a project, because then they also have the Inflation Reduction Act tax deductions and credits available to them. So that's kind of how I start looking at layering. But Fitwell, we've seen Fitwell be a nice kind of layer onto a LEED certification or an NGBS certification, et cetera. That really kind of speaks and emphasizes, kind of re-emphasizes some of the aspects of occupant experience from those rating systems.
We have one more question here, which is, what are some of the rating systems that you would use for a historic preservation or renovation project?
Yeah. I would say, I guess if it's just like It's not a residential building. So I would probably go to lead. I think lead is very well suited for those types of projects. Um, yeah,
And in fact, I could add to that, for historic preservation or renovation project, if you use something like LEED, you get so many credits because of reusing of materials. And especially it's an existing site, you would get a lot of the points if it is an infill project or within an urban area. So leads would help. You'll get a lot of basic mandatory credits just checked off in a renovation project for if you're going for lead,
yeah,
right?
yep,
Um, this one thing that we did not touch on in this presentation, which is the social aspect. We spoke about energy efficiency, we spoke about water um, occupant experience, but social equity is one of those words that has been used recently in all the different conferences, right? So, what are some of the different strategies or points or credits that these rating systems are adopting now to encompass one aspect of sustainability, which is social?
yeah. So I think for one, lead version 5 is really working to address and incorporate more credits and requirements around social equity. So there is a mandatory, I believe it's mandatory, um, requirement in the integrated process to address social equity. So going through a checklist and having those conversations with your project team. So similarly, EGC, Enterprise Green Communities, kind of has that equity aspect to it and really making sure we are including features that are supportive of the community and the occupants that will be in those buildings. And then ILFI, I haven't looked at the version 4.1 aspects of it, but knowing 4.0 and kind of their core certification is really making sure you are engaging with the community, you are including the community. The core certification, this just is on the top of my head because I had to work on it yesterday, but is kind of that public art element and making sure we're drawing on experience people in our community to contribute to the project, and making sure that our footprint of our project serves our community, right? We have our building, but other aspects around the building that can serve the community. So those are ways that we're starting to see, and it's nice to see all of these rating systems further include requirements and options for addressing social equity. I think you're muted, Kritika.
Kritika, you're muted right now.
We are right at that 1 o'clock mark. So, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank Jen for taking time to present um, all the green standards to us and enlightening us about the different systems, their pros, the cons, and what it entails. So, thank you, Jen, and thank you, AIA Potomac Valley, for putting this presentation out for everyone to view. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.